Avtar Meher Baba ki Jai. Mic's on mute except Neha ji. You can please read the seven realities. Are you able to see it on screen?
Yes, just little. Go slow. Existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, and performance of the religious ceremonies and rites, but the understanding of the following seven realities. First, the only existence is that the one and only God who is self in every finite self. Second, the only real love is the love for its infinity God, which is arouses in the intense longing to see, know, and become one with the truth, God. Third, the only real sacrifice is that in which the pursuance of the love, all things of body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. Fourth, the only real renunciation is that the which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. Fifth, the only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and so called bad, in saints and in so called sinners. This knowledge requires this. Oh, it's gone
Sorry.
up.
Yeah. Can you
Just
see it here?
go
Yeah.
little. Can you little
Okay.
down?
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you see it?
No, no, you need to go little down. I was reading the up. Yeah, the
You're here. This
n-
knowledge. I'm tracking.
okay,
Yeah,
okay,
you're
okay.
here. Yeah, yeah.
This
This.
knowledge requires to help all equally as circumstances demand without expectations of reward. When compelled to take part of the dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling of each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harmed. Sixth one, the only control is the discipline of the sense of abstain from indulgence of low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. Seven, the only real surrender is that in which poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstances, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with perfect calm to the will of God. Avtar Meher Baba ki jai.
Jai Baba. Thank you. So with that, we'll go back to our reading. Any comments, questions on our yesterday's session? We can take that up before starting it uh, because we are stopped abruptly. Okay, so if there's, I take that
So
as a no.
how much is left now? Are we almost reached to the uh, completion of discourses?
No, no, no. We will
No?
probably need another 15 hours, 14 to
Okay.
15 hours. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah. Okay, so I will start from the third paragraph of page 337 on the physical book. I just need to adjust the size. Yeah. Um, Request all of you to go on mute, please. Thank you. Power behind incarnations is craving. The power that keeps the individual soul bound to the wheel of life and death is its thirst for separate existence, which is a condition for a host of cravings connected with objects and experiences of the world of duality. It is for the fulfillment of cravings that the ego mind keeps on incarnating itself. When all forms of craving disappear, the impressions that create and enliven the ego mind disappear. With the disappearance of these impressions, the ego mind itself is shed, with the result that there is only the realization of one eternal, unchanging oversoul who is the only reality. God realization is the end of the incarnations of the ego mind because it is the end of its very existence. As long as the ego mind exists in some form, there is an inevitable and irresistible urge for incarnations. When there is cessation of the ego mind, there is cessation of incarnations in the final fulfillment of self realization. Culmination of reincarnations. The life of the reincarnating individual has many events and phases. The wheel of life makes its ceaseless rounds, lifting the individual to the heights or bringing him down from high positions. It thus contributes to the enrichment of his experience. Ideals left unattained in one life are pursued further in the next life. Things left undone are finished mutely. Rough edges left by incomplete endeavor are rounded off. Wrongs are eventually set right. The accounts of give and take between persons receive renewed adjustment by the repayment of karmic debts and the recovery of karmic dues. At last, out of the ripeness of experience and through the dissolution of the ego mind, the soul enters into the soul unity of divine life. In this divine life, there is neither the binding of giving nor the binding of taking, because the soul has completely transcended the consciousness of separateness or duality. Analogy of drama. The drama of the continued life of the individual soul has many acts. From the standpoint of the worldly existence of the soul, a curtain may be said to be drawn over its life after the closing of each act. But no act yields its real significance if it's regarded as complete in itself. It has to be viewed from its wider context as being a link between the acts already performed and the acts still to come. Its meaning is entwined with the theme of the whole drama of which it is a part. The end of the act is not the end of the progressive theme. The actors disappear from the stage of earth only to reappear again in new capacities and new contexts. Game of hide and seek. The actors are so engrossed in their respective roles that they treat them as the be-all and end-all of all existence. For the major part of their continued lives, running into innumerable incarnations, they are unconscious of the closely guarded truth that the author of the drama, in his imaginative production, himself became all the actors and played the game of hide and seek in order to come into full and conscious possession of his own creative infinity. Infinity has to go through the illusion of finitehood to know itself as infinity, and the author has to play the parts of all of the actors to know himself as the author of this greatest detective story, worked out through the cycles of creation. We end that chapter, but this is a very profound analogy, so I'll just probably give you a couple of minutes of this analogy used in Vedanta. So there is this famous analogy of the play and how the play had two people in real lives, a king and a beggar, participating in the play, right? So when both of them get on stage, they don the roles of the king and the beggar respectively. But on stage and in their minds and in their selves, they know that one is king and one is beggar, right? So the problem with us in this life is that we do not know that we are the king and the beggar. We are lost in the part. We are so deeply engrossed when we are on the stage as either the beggar or the king that we are not able to recognize the true nature of ourselves. So I keep thinking about that analogy whenever we talk about the drop soul and the oversoul. With that, I'll pause for any other comments from anybody else.
From the practical standpoint of view, the life that we live, I think this is very profound, that anybody that we are interacting with, if it is family, friends, office, colleagues, or anybody else that we interact is actually a part of his own play, and they are come to play a part in your life as has been directed by the God.
Yes.
So getting upset or getting any negative emotions which we get to always have experience in life are just delusion in that sense actually. So very
It's not delusion, it's a mirror of your own image.
yeah. So those things, so very nicely written actually.
Absolutely.
From the practical standpoint, I really like it very much.
I just recall Baba used to play cricket on both the sides.
Yes. Yes. He used to never join one of the teams. Yes.
And it happens when you start going towards the spiritual path, entire circle, the people around you, everything changes. And that's why when people started coming to Mehrabad, they realized that they are losing their jobs, or the partners, they are having problems, and the reason is Baba makes changes, shift your entire circle, the clutter around you. He cleans it, and your circle started changing. You see different people coming in your life. So different lessons, new lessons are just waiting on the path, because you are changing as a person, as a human being.
True.
Yeah, Jai Baba.
Okay. Great. So we'll just continue.
Sorry, Karthik.
Yeah.
There's one line I really like to understand from Kama. Just go
Sure.
back.
Yeah.
Just this line. The actors disappear from the stage on Earth only to reappear again in new capacity and contacts. This is not for reincarnation. This is something else. Is it?
No, I think it's talking about us as mortal human beings, where on page 337, it says that treading the spiritual path continues for several incarnations before the aspirant attains the goal. So now, being Baba lovers, we all understand that the goal is God realization, Nirvikalpa Samadhi or Nirvana. Now, the last three paragraphs that we read, it's one of the most important. It's probably one of my favorite. I have a top 10. Now, I've discussed this with Karthik, the greatest detective story ever told. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. First of all, here the author has to play all the parts. I just got this insight. The author is basically the infinite unconsciousness which came from the whim and broke down into different drop souls, Atma. And each one of us is an actor. And I think in our previous reading on different chapters on reincarnation and karma, we had discussed about how the soul has to be born in the east or the west in different cycles of time in different ages in the male or female form. So basically this drama, one of the ways I look at it is that we are dealing with three aspects: the head, heart, and hands. Head is Jnana Yoga, heart is Bhakti Yoga, and hands is Karma Yoga. So another thing we have understood is there is what Baba says, there is a divine plan. Yesterday I was talking about material science and spiritual science. There is a method to the madness, as they say. There is a saying, there is a process, a scientific process out here. And I think that by God speaks and discourses, we have what I call as the Maslow's pyramid, climbing Mount Everest. Being on top of Mount Everest is achieving nirvana or nirvikalpa samadhi. Now, Baba has given us what are the challenges that we will face as a human being. So I think that if you, depending on each person's personality, for me, this is like a game of duality. It's like I said, a computer game, not with artificial intelligence, but with infinite intelligence. Okay. Some other people, especially I think Baba lovers who are women, are more from the heart. I think women come from the heart to the mind. And I think for men, at least I'm talking about myself, I go from the mind to the heart, and I want to keep a balance between mind and heart, head and heart, so that we can be practical about our day-to-day living. Because the basic funda I've understood about Baba is there's nothing like nirvana, nirvikalpa samadhi is something is already latent in us. I think what we are suffering is a ego virus, and this reading all this helps us understand ourselves and how do we try to avoid the pitfalls. So another thing I want to mention is there is also one mention here in 337. The wheel of life makes its ceaseless rounds, lifting the individual to the heights or bringing him down from high positions. I have personally seen, even with myself and with my other friends, that people in the same lifetime go to the top. I mean, you can take like a guy like Rajat Gupta, he was the top of the topmost. Everybody looked at him as a symbol, and then he had a fall down. Now,
Yes,
nothing being
yes,
judgmental out here, it's just a case study of
yes.
how I
Hmm.
think what reincarnation says that is in this life you could be a king, and in the next life you can be a beggar, because you have to experience both the opposites of duality. So that is the part. And the third thing that comes out of this chapter is relationship with
Actually,
master
it
carry.
is a part
Can I
of,
finish,
you know,
please? Can I
yeah,
just
sorry.
finish?
Okay.
Uh, the other takeaway on this chapter is that on page 335, relationship with master carried on through lifetimes. I believe personally that we are all blessed with Baba's grace because we probably have some connection with him in many past lives. So the important thing in this journey is to be connected with a perfect master or avatar is itself a divine grace. So throughout this reading, one thing that comes out is the importance of a perfect master to guide us so that we don't get distracted from our spiritual path. Jai Baba. Yeah. Yeah. What's your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
Neha, you had something to say.
No, I just yesterday I was attending a Mumbai Center Zoom meeting, and there Cyrus said very beautifully that ego doesn't mean I or proud. It is not just that. It's everything. Just identifying ourselves with anything is ego. So it doesn't go actually. It goes very, very late. So don't, put your mind in each and everything and saying this is ego and this is not ego. So that's one point I wanted to put. And still, I'm not getting the answer of the question which I had asked. Is he talking about something else? Do we have to incarnate more than a human being, or just a reincarnation he's talking about?
No, I think that it's only about that if we have not finished with our sanskaras, we have to reincarnate. As simple as that.
That's
You
that's
can
that's it.
actually attain self-realization right now. You're self-realized.
That's it.
It's your,
Yeah.
coming back to the point about ego, the
Only
word
only
ego.
these two lines I like to understand, which I was asking. That is he
Right.
talking about any other form than human?
No.
No. Okay. Okay.
The author of the drama is playing all the different roles, which means the author is the director, which is the infinite unconsciousness, which is now split into all these various actors. So if you look at a movie, we
No,
have
no,
seen
the
somebody
two
come
line, only two lines I like to understand that whether I'm after the human being, is it not that we have to come again as in, and he's giving some hint in this.
So
No.
can you just tell us
So
which line you're talking about?
Yeah, the one we were reading, just go up, bus, that's it.
Yeah.
Uh,
The drama of the continued life.
Any of drama. I don't know where it's gone. Sorry, I'm not.
Okay, this is the last
The one
page.
which we're reading, the one which
Mhm.
we're reading, just now we were reading this. There were
Beyond
two lines. I was
the
okay,
major
fine,
part.
fine. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead. I'll read it by myself. Thank you.
Yeah. And do
Thanks.
post if you have a question. Okay, so with that, we come to the close of part 3, which is reincarnation and karma, and we go to part 4, which is spirit and matter. In this, the chapters are new humanity, violence and non-violence, violence and non-violence further explained, the life of the spirit, the avenues to understanding, the infinity of the truth, and the travail of the new world order, which we already completed, if you remember, because of the appropriateness of the COVID crisis. Live for God and die for God, action and inaction, selfless service. No. I think it's just with, live for God. Yeah, live for God and die for God. So it's got.
Karthik, if I remember, I think we read 3 of the chapters from this because of the COVID situation. The new humanity, the travail of the new order, and the die for God, live for
Live
God
for
and die
die.
for.
Okay, correct.
Yeah.
So
So
now
you can
we
go to the
directly
next
go to violence and
violence.
non-violence.
Yes.
Okay. 788. Okay. Jay Baba, request all of you to go on mute. It's
Page number?
88. It's 67 on the physical book. Thank you. Request all of you to go on mute. Going beyond words. Firstly, the chapter title is Violence and Non-Violence. Going beyond words. Man has a tendency to cling to catchwords and to allow his actions to be determined by them almost mechanically without bringing his actions into direct relation with the living perception that these words embody. Words have their own place and use in life. But if action is to be intelligent, it is imperative that the meaning these words are intended to convey should be carefully analyzed and fixed. Among the words that need such exploration, few are as important as violence and non-violence. They have a direct bearing upon the ideologies that shape not only particular actions, but also the entire tenor of life. Spiritual understanding goes beyond formulations. Spiritual life is a matter of perception and not of mechanical conformity to rules, even when these rules are meant to stand for the highest values. It implies an understanding that goes beyond all words or formulations. All words and formulations have a tendency to limit the truth. Therefore, those who seek to bring out the spirit underlying these formulations often have to launch upon a searching analysis of the formulated principles and to supplement this analysis by constantly retaining touch with concrete examples taken from life. This is particularly true of those guiding principles formulated through the opposite concepts of violence and nonviolence. The words violence and nonviolence are in ordinary references applicable to such diverse situations in practical life that no exposition of the issues involved can be complete unless it takes note of these diverse situations and use them as a starting point. Representative situations is the heading. However, for the purpose of exposition, it is not necessary to exhaust numerically all the possible diversities that would be covered by these words. It is enough to consider some of the most representative situations. The representative situations mentioned below have been selected because of their capacity to shed abundant light on the fundamental values that center around the concepts of violence and nonviolence. So the first is the case of the drowning man. Situation number 1. Suppose a man who does not know how to swim has fallen into a lake and is drowning, and that there is another person nearby who is good at swimming and wants to save him. The drowning man has a tendency to grasp desperately at the person who comes to his aid, and the hold is often so restricting that it may not only make it impossible to save the drowning man, but may even cause the drowning of the one who came to help. The one who wishes to save the drowning man may therefore have to strike him unconscious before he can help him. Striking the drowning man under such circumstances cannot be looked upon either as violence or non-violence. Situation number 2. Suppose a person is suffering from some disease that can only be cured through an operation. Thus, in order to cure the suffering patient as well as to protect others from catching this infection, a surgeon may have to remove the infected part. This cutting of the body with a knife also cannot be looked upon either as violence or non-violence. That was case of surgery. Next is the case of aggressive nation, situation number 3. Suppose an aggressive nation invades a weaker nation for selfish purposes, and another nation, inspired solely by the noble desire of saving the weak nation, resists this aggressive invasion by armed force. Fighting in defense of the weak nation cannot be looked upon either as either violence or non-violence, but can be called non-violent violence. Situation number 4, which is the case of the mad dog. Suppose a mad dog has run amok and is likely to bite some school children, and the teachers in the school destroy the mad dog in order to protect the children. This destruction of the mad dog does imply violence, but there is no hatred in it. Case of non-violence of the strong. Suppose a physically strong man is insulted and spat upon by an arrogant man who is nevertheless weak. And suppose that the strong man who has the power to crush the arrogant man not only desists from hurting him, but calmly explains to him the gospel of love. This action implies non-violence, but it is the non-violence of the strong. The first 3 situations mentioned above clearly bring about the question whether a situation implies violence or non-violence cannot be decided except by entering into many subtle and delicate considerations regarding the diverse details of the situation and the motive that prompts action. So the section is need for delicate considerations. The last 2 situations show that even where violence or non-violence is implied, certain other factors give meaning beyond the ordinary sense attached to these words violence and non-violence. Comments on the case of the drowning man. A detailed analysis of situation number 1 shows that though it involves the use of force without prior consent of the victim, the motive was to save the drowning man. The application of force without the consent of the man on whom it is used may be termed a case of violence. But force is used for the good of the drowning man and not with any desire to inflict injury or harm on him. And in that sense, it may be said that it is not a case of violence. In these special senses, the situation can be said to involve violence and non-violence respectively. But in the ordinary sense of the words, it cannot be looked upon as a case of either violence or non-violence. Comments on the case of surgery. Situation number 2 is slightly different. Here also, there is application of force, even to cutting the body, which is for the good of the patient. But in most cases, the patient gives his prior consent to the operation. Further, the operation is intended not only to protect the patient himself from the further ravages of the disease, but is also intended to protect others from the spread of infection. The application of force here springs out of the motive of doing unmixed good both to the patient as well as many others who might come into contact with him. Since no harm is intended, the application of force does not amount to violence in the ordinary sense, nor can it be adequately looked upon as non-violence, since it's a clear case of cutting a part of a living body. Situation number 3 is the comments on the case of the aggressor nation. Situation number 3 is also very interesting and instructive. Here, the fighting involves offering resistance to aggression, with no selfish motive or personal interest, but solely with the purpose of defending the weaker nation. This may inflict much injury and even destruction upon the aggressor nation, and the use of force is not only without its prior consent, but against its deliberate and conscious will. Even in this situation, we do not have a clear case of violence. In spite of the injury and harm involved, the application of force is not only for the good of the weaker nation, which is the victim, but in a very important sense, it is also for the good of the aggressor nation itself. Because through the resistance encountered to its aggression, it is gradually cured of its spiritual weakness or disease of having a tendency to invade and exploit weaker nations. This violence is really not violent, and so it is called non-violent violence. Comparison between aggressor nation and the surgery case. The case of fighting with an aggressor nation is very similar to the case of surgery on an infected part of the body. In the case of fighting with the aggressor nation, the good of the weaker nation appears to be the primary result, and the good of the aggressor nation against which force is exercised appears to be a secondary result. In the case of the operation, the good of the patient on whom force is exerted appears to be the primary result, and the good of others appears to be a secondary result. But this is only a minor difference in benefit, and when the two situations are carefully analyzed and compared, it is found that both promote equally the good of the target of force as well as many others involved in the situation. Defending the weak, a form of selfless service. Defending the weak is an important form of selfless service, and it is a part of karma yoga, or the yoga of action. Use of force, when necessary for this purpose, is completely justified as an indispensable instrument for securing the desired objective. But any fighting undertaken to defend the weak must be without any selfish motives or hatred if it is to have unalloyed spiritual importance. It resembles, for example, a case of a man who defends a woman by being attacked by another man for vile purposes, thus saving the woman's honor and life and punishing the attack and making him repent. Now we go to comments on cases of mad dog and non-violence of the strong. Situation number 4 is definitely a case of violence. However, it is justified because there is no hatred in it and because it is intended to promote the greater good of the children who might be attacked by the mad dog. The case of the strong man who gives a sermon instead of seeking revenge, situation number 5, implies non-violence, but it is not a case of inaction. It implies neither passivity nor weakness, but strength and true creative action of an impersonal nature. It is non-violence of the strong. So spiritual understanding above rules and requires divine love. The detailed analysis and comparison of the above diverse situations bring out the fact that questions concerning violence and non-violence, their justification or otherwise, and the ascertainment of their true value or lack of value cannot be decided by any formal enunciation of a universal rule. They involve many delicate spiritual issues and implications. A right understanding of the status of violence and non-violence in the scheme of spiritual values requires a true perception of the meaning of the purpose of existence. Action, therefore, should not be governed by means of any slogans, however high-sounding, based upon incomplete and insufficient ideas of mere violence or mere non-violence. It should be a spontaneous outcome of divine love, which is above duality, and of spiritual understanding, which is above rules.
This true perception, this line about true perception, I think perception is something which needs to be understood and explained. If somebody could explain that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think this line about the true perception, a right and understanding of the status of violence and non-violence in the scheme of spiritual values requires a true perception of the meaning of the purpose of existence. I think if you could elaborate this.
Well, I can tell you that based on my understanding, I think we all perceive situations based on our degree of consciousness. Now, even when we look at our as a human being, if you live for 84 years, I divide that into 12 parts. 12 multiplied by 7 is 84, 7, 14, 21, 28, and so on. At each stage of this phase of life, we perceive the same thing in a different way. When you're a kid, the toys are very important, but as you grow up, it's not that important. So coming back to the aspect of the spiritual path, I think what it implies is that there are certain ground rules out here, what I call as material laws and spiritual laws, which we need to understand. In fact, the last line which says it should be a spontaneous outcome of divine love, which is above duality, and of spiritual understanding, which is above rules. I think when he talks about rules, I think it is about the man-made rules, which probably can contradict the divine laws, which is the laws of nature, laws of material science and laws of spiritual science. So, so what you're trying to say is, and plus, we are dealing with duality, and that is the most challenging thing for every individual. Unless you reach Manonash, one will be dealing with duality right up to the sixth plane, you know. So this perception will keep changing on a daily basis, moment to moment, depending on our, degree of consciousness. And one more thing I wanted to mention was in the first line, excuse me, man has a tendency to cling to catchwords and to allow his actions to be determined by them almost mechanically without bringing his actions into direct relation with the living perception that these words embody. For example, when Neha was mentioning about the ego, which was talked about at the Bombay Center. Now, again, this word is very, I'm not calling it ambiguous. It's a terminology. And I think the definition of ego mind will change based on the context of the situation. So according to me, ego is basically, what we call as kama, krodha, lobh, lust, greed, anger, dealing with the gross, subtle and mental body. Baba said, convert lust into love, greed into generosity, anger into compassion. My definition of ego is all the English alphabets: anger, aversion, backbiting, craving, duality. So if you open up a dictionary, any word that you use, you have an antonym for it probably. And all of us as individual human beings are dealing with different aspects of the ego in different degrees based on sanskaras. So I think that is what is the whole game of duality, as such. So perception is all based on the particular situation we are in and how we perceive it based on our action of thoughts, words and deeds and so on and so forth. This is a long topic, but I hope I made sense. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, can I say something?
Sure.
Jai Baba, when you talk about ego, it is not only, you're not talking about only yourself. It is also about, things like, which are much broader, like my Pune, my Bombay, my country, that is also ego, I feel is also, it can extend in any way. When you say, this is my house, it is also
my
something
Baba?
with ego. My Baba is fine.
I think probably you're referring to the Beatles song, I, Me, Mine. That is a very interesting.
So ego, you kind of give a life to something which, you think of and become your, you want to make it yours, which is again feeding your ego in that sense. I don't know whether I'm making sense, but.
Another analogy about the ego is Baba has mentioned somewhere, it's like a scaffolding. When you look at the top-down approach from the most original whim and look at the whole evolution, reincarnation process, the ego mind starts to develop probably in the animal kingdom. And the ego has a role to play. And it's like a scaffolding. But, there is another analogy where they say you have to use a thorn to remove a thorn. So we have to use our ego mind in a very intelligent way, and the intelligent way is probably understanding the laws of nature or understanding God's speech and discourses and see how we can use that in our day-to-day life, So the ego mind is like a tool as such. It can break you or make you, that's up to us. Jai Baba.
Yeah, there is a term, I think in the discourses, in the chapters of ego is provisional ego. So that's we have to have it to encounter our ego actually.
Yes, the provisional working ego is a beautiful concept, and now I won't get into it because we have not come to that chapter. But Nigam is right, it's a beautiful tool or technique that Baba has given us how we can deal with our ego and be connected with him.
Great. Any other questions or can we continue?
Yeah, you can continue. One more comment I wanted to make was these two chapters, violence and non-violence, page 67 and 72 are connected together. So actually both those chapters need to be read, successively because you'll see that a lot of things that are referred in the next chapter are connected to the previous chapter.
Sure.
So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I think we might be able to just finish this as well. Violence and non-violence further explained, which is the next chapter, page number 72. Non-violence. Non-violence, pure and simple, based on divine love. Here, one sees all as one's own self and is beyond both friendship and enmity. Never, under any circumstances, does a single thought of violence enter one's mind. Non-violence of the brave, based on the unlimited pure love. This applies to those who, although not one with all through actual realization, consider no one as their enemy. They try to win over even the aggressor through love and give up their lives if attacked, not through fear, but through love. Violence, non-violent violence, based on unlimited love. Violence done solely to defend the weak, where there is no question of self-defense or self-motivation, is non-violent violence. Selfless violence, based on limited human love. Here, violence is done in self-defense when one is attacked treacherously and with no other selfish motive. For example, when one's mother's honor is on the point of being violated by a lustful man, one defends one's mother. Also, when a nation's honor is at stake and it is being attacked by enemies, the nation's selfless effort at defending itself is selfless violence. Fifth one is non-violence of the coward, based on unlimited weakness of character and mind. Those who do not resist aggression because of fear and for no other reason belong to this class. Selfish violence based on hatred and lust. Number 6. When violence is done for selfish motives by an individual or nation for power, selfish gains, and so forth, it's called selfish violence. Non-violence, pure and simple, means love infinite. It is the goal of life. When the state of pure divine love is reached, the aspirant is at one with God. To reach this goal, there must be intense longing, and the aspirant who has this longing to realize the supreme state has to begin by practicing what is termed non-violence of the brave. This applies to those who, though not one with all through actual realization, I'll read that line again. This applies to those who, though not one with all through actual realization, consider no one as their enemy. They try to win over even the aggressor through love and give up their lives if attacked, not through fear, but through love. As pointed out, non-violence of the brave is practicable for those individuals who have an intense longing to attain the supreme state. This longing is not to be found in the masses. If, therefore, it is intended to lead the masses to pure non-violence, it is necessary first to prepare them for the non-violence of the brave. To achieve this aim in a practical way, it is necessary to make them follow, in the beginning, the principle of non-violent violence, that is, violence done solely to defend the weak without any selfish motive whatever. In times of actual war, when the masses are taken by surprise, they are not in the mood even to listen to advice about having intense longing to attain the supreme goal of life. The only practical way to lead them finally toward the goal is to begin by inculcating in them the principle of non-violent violence and then gradually introducing the non-violence of the brave. A premature attempt to introduce non-violence of the brave among the unprepared masses in actual wartime would not only fail but incur a serious danger of bringing in the fatal non-violence of the coward. That is, the masses would not resist the aggression simply because of fear and for no other reason. The masses may also be educated and led to the non-violence of the brave by making them follow the principles of selfless violence instead of those of non-violent violence. Selfless violence is violence done in self-defense when attacked treacherously. No other selfish motive should be allowed to justify the violence. Thus, for example, when one's mother's honor is on the point of being violated by a lustful man and one defends her by resorting to violence, one is said to have followed the principles of selfless violence. Similarly, when the honor of a nation is at stake and it is being attacked by enemies, the nation's selfless effort in defending itself is selfless violence. A tinge of selfishness being present as the mother's is one's own mother, the love expressed here is limited human love. Non-violence of the coward is, as pointed out, fatal. So also is selfish violence, that is, violence for selfish motives by individuals or nations to gain power or for other selfish ends. It will therefore be seen that while non-violence, pure and simple, is the goal of life, this goal has to be attained by individual seekers of God by following non-violence of the brave. The masses who have not the requisite intense longing for being one with Him have to be led gradually towards this goal by the principles of non-violent violence or those of selfless violence according to the circumstances. In conclusion, it must be very clearly understood that non-violent violence and selfless violence are merely means of attaining the goal of life, namely pure and simple non-violence or love infinite. This means the means must not be confused or otherwise mixed up with the goal itself. The motive and the result are always judged by general acceptance as to whether they are good or bad. For example, non-violence of the brave and the non-violence of the coward are both non-violence, but from the viewpoint of the motive force behind it, non-violence of the brave is born of love and the non-violence of the coward is born of fear, which is the opposite of love. While as non-violence they are not opposites, their motives are infinitely opposed to each other. The motive behind non-violence of the brave is losing one's life to gain infinite love. But the motive behind non-violence of the coward is to save one's own life, which gains infinite contempt. Non-violence of the coward we put therefore under the heading of non-love, while we put non-violence of the brave under the heading of love. Non-violent violence is not placed under the heading of love, but under the heading of duty. Duty done selflessly to others according to Karma Yoga, which eventually is linked up with unlimited love, but motivated by human love. The difference between the two opposite forces cannot be obliterated, but the transformation of one force to another can happen when expressed rightly through the right channels. Food given wrongly becomes poison, while poison, like strychnine, given in small quantities as a tonic, becomes food for the nerves. Although food in substance does not become poison and vice versa, the action and the result due to the use can become transformed. That's the end of the chapter. Okay. Any comments? This is the types of violence and non-violence and how they are differentiated and relevant from a spiritual standpoint. Kama?
Well, the takeaway from both the chapters, it's one of the two toughest chapters I have tried to figure out, but it's very interesting because you need a couple of readings and you have to make your own notes, because it's almost like a formula where he has categorized different kinds of violence based on the situation. So again, I'm re-emphasizing that the word violence, as he said, we can interpret it in different ways. In the big picture, we have seen that if you look at human civilization, we had human violence through wars, which we have discussed in the New Humanity and the travails of the New World Order and live for God and die for God. That's why this chapter comes under that particular heading of spirit and matter. So the interesting thing is that it's a very challenging situation. Like when you're in a situation where you have to do self-defense, where you have to use violence, how do you use it with vivek and vairagya? I think big purpose, the big picture is what I've understood is Vivek and Vairagya. How can you use critical discrimination to act in a certain situation, especially where you have to use violence, and how to be detached or have dispassion from that action? And I think probably the example of Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna and Arjuna, I think it is a very interesting example of, non-violent violence or whatever. So that is what I, understood from this. And a lot of case studies and examples are given out here. So it's a very individual process of how we understand this chapter.
Okay, I have
Yeah.
one key
I want to
question.
add something.
Yeah. You want to go first, Ashok?
Yeah, okay. So this Vivek and Vairagya, I think it refers to the motive behind the act. I think the motive, the basic motive.
Intentions behind.
Yeah, yeah, right. That's right. The intention of the motive behind it. It's not doing it out of any anger. It's out of either motive. That's the important.
True. The intent and motive is more important than the actual means employed. So my question is, I did not register and make notes on those different types of violence and non-violence. If you think it is important, we need to internalize and absorb this better. If there is a need for this in other chapters, so that's the only question I had.
I want to share my takeaways from the chapter. So, what I understood from this chapter, I mean, it was very interesting because I never read these chapters with so much intensity as we have gone through it now. So, I'm really, I think something is added today to my understanding. Because I think we are, the examples that are given are very broad and very big examples like nation and extreme situations of getting killed or being killed by someone or saving someone and all that. But because we are on the spiritual context, how can we use this violence, non-violence, and these aspects of it in the spiritual context in the day-to-day life, more so when it is focused towards self? When do we get, I think the anger, the lust, the greed, and the personality clashes that come in between, and the need to kind of assert oneself, and all these actions, whether they originate out of the limited ego to kind of prove one's point strongly, or we try to live a life because of our beliefs that we have, and we form certain conclusions that this is the right thing to do because it worked for me in the past. So I live my life accordingly, whether it is violent or it is love, out of love. So these things that I think the whole chapter I thought should be focused towards self, and see what actions do I take in life and how do I behave in life, how am I using this information for the self growth and my own my own journey to reach God. So I think I have very interested oxymoron words that are used, and I think that violent, non-violence, and violent, non-violent violence, and all these are like very different kind of words that really tell you. But I think what Neha was mentioning, or someone was talking about, the intent, and that intent is very important. With what intent I am acting, that intent is very important. And someone just spoke about the perception, or what is Ashok was mentioning, I think, about how do we understand the whole thing, because we are talking about the perceptions. I think there are my perceptions have changed million times probably, till we reach one final perception and say that this will not change now, this is my final perception. Until that happens, I think we are just in the course of understanding and getting deeper and deeper and going broader and broader. So this chapter definitely has helped to understand more. I think it is more based on our behaviors and how we process the information when we look at external. So good. I think I'm happy today about this session. It really added something to me.
This process also dilutes our karmic. If we understand this chapter clearly, it dilutes our karmic also, isn't it, Vidya?
Yes.
I don't know, Neha, that I always look at things one thing at a time. In a way, yes, I think it helps us to deal with our karma in a positive way rather than fighting with it. Having a neck to neck fight many times is not useful. A deeper understanding really helps. So I can't say with authority that this will help me completely dealing. This is the only thing that will help me deal with karma. But yes, I think it definitely helps to deal with actions that we are doing. I mean, I don't know, but I can't use the word, very big word, karma, because karma, we don't have the total vision of what karma pattern is. But definitely in the movement, in that action movement, what are we doing? Are we getting violent? Are we being maintaining our poise? Are we getting understanding? Or we by hook or crook, we just want to say that this is my understanding, so everyone should understand that. I mean, these kind of things I think are very important when we are using it on the spiritual, even in the families, within the friends, and in the spiritual groups, because each one is perceiving the same words, like that Kama mentioned, that the words are words. And I always found in Baba groups that a person who is a good orator takes one word and goes on and on and on with talking about the full understanding he has got from all the scriptures in the world, and he gives. But after so much of talk, I have attended talks when people speak for 2 hours and the audience have not got anything. They just got confused thoroughly as to what he was trying to say. So so I think this kind of because it is a perception again of that individual, and the perception comes from the experience of life, and the life experiences and learnings are different for different people. So one perception is not a common perception of everyone. The perception that helps the individual to grow on the spiritual path and reach ultimate God, the beloved, is the final and the best perception. And after that, the perception need not be changed. So many a times when a lot of discussions take place, it is good to allow those discussions to happen rather than pushing people to jump, because that is what Baba used to do. Baba used to create so many games among the people, allow people to fight, allow people to, in fact, he used to tell two people who had conflict, come fight, even hit each other, do whatever is necessary. But after that is over, what did you get from it? Because he had a purpose of doing it. So I think the violence, non-violence, and all these things have to be focused towards self. That is very important. What am I doing? I mean, even now in Corona environment, sorry, I'm just going on and on maybe a little bit, but I want to add here that I have seen pictures posted when two bananas are given to a poor man, and there are 10 people in the picture giving 2 bananas to one poor man. Now, where is I mean, this is an extreme example, but everyone who is trying to help the other person, trying to show that they are doing so much, that service is of no good. It doesn't reach anywhere, because Baba very clearly said that first service is please free yourself. And I think which is my next talk that is also coming. So I'm probably getting into that talk. So, but I think eventually action that should be always focused on self, thoughts focused on self, everything should be focused towards self. Jai Baba.
I have one query here.
Thank you,
The whole
yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. Thank you. Yeah.
Both the chapters refer to violence, as I see it, in the form of hurting somebody physically, but the other aspect of psychological hurt also is violence. That is, I didn't see how to gel that in this explanations.
Correct. I think that's what is my understanding also. I think that's why you said that the examples are extreme. I don't have to answer it immediately, because I think there are other people might be having thought on this. But I was also, I totally agree. I said, yeah, it is just not the action or non-violence of action, non-violence of thoughts.
Thought. Yeah. Thought, word, even
I
being
think
very.
in this
Yes.
chapter, he's only dealing with actions like death, because he's talking
Yes.
about death of the dog. He's talking about a part of the body being cut out. He's talking
Yes.
about, some form of hurting somebody, like war or something where killing is happening. So this is just extreme death in different ways. He's
Yes.
not
Yes.
talking about injury or violence where somebody's feelings are concerned. I think.
Yes, that is not a part of the explanations here. Maybe we will get that insight somewhere else. Kama, you have any idea?
I
Because
think
you might
that's
have.
a very good point, Doc. You made that. I think all of you that you talked about this two chapter, the violence and non-violence is more oriented towards the physical part. So when we take real life examples on a practical aspect, we have seen family violence, abuse. One is the physical violence towards the children and the spouse, physical and mental violence. It's a permutation combination. That is one of the biggest challenges, as we noted in some of the newspaper articles which I've read in the Guardian, which is if you want to have a free international newspaper, the UK, the Guardian is a great paper to read. And they talk about how violence has increased during the coronavirus, during the lockdown. Now, this is where the spiritual understanding is very important. If two people are not getting along with each other and in the process of separation, but they are forced to live in the same apartment, how do you deal with that? Typically the psychological violence that goes on. So unless people have this kind of wisdom, based on what Baba has, talked about, I think it's a very difficult situation. So yes, here it's more of a macro aspect, but it's not dealt with the psychological micro aspects. But the principles remain the same. You have to use Vivek and Vairagya, critical discrimination and detachment and dispassion. And I have always believed that, like an MBA program, every situation is unique, every problem or challenge is unique, and it has a unique solution. So that is where a spiritual understanding will help. And I think when Ashok was talking about perception, there is a line which says here on page 67, spiritual life is a matter of perception and not of mechanical conformity to rules, even when these rules are meant to stand for the highest values. It's a very paradoxical statement, but it's a very interesting statement to dwell on. So it will take a couple of interesting discussions on that. But Jay Baba, that's it.
I just wanted to add something. Is it so? Probably some of the steps towards the annihilation of the ego mind are mentioned in these two chapters about violence and non-violence. So basically, the Manonash stage where you want to annihilate the ego mind. I think some of the or interpretations are there in this.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So I think with that, we can pause the reading part of the discussion for today. Stop recording and then we start a new file, but basically get into the second part where Vidya is going to talk about the importance of self-realization today. So thank you, everybody. Jai Baba. I'm just going to stop this and just stay online. Just stay online.